The room went quiet when my name was announced, not the kind of silence you get when people are surprised. This was different. It felt rehearsed. Like everyone already knew, and the noise just dropped on cue. I remember standing there, halfway between my chair and the front of the room, unsure whether to smile or sit back down. My manager, well, former manager, was already clapping. A few others followed, slower than usual. Someone coughed. A chair scraped. "Congratulations," he said, loud enough for the whole department. "You've earned this." I nodded, because that's what you do. Years of late nights, weekend emails, fixing other people's mistakes without complaint, it all led here. This was the role I'd been chasing since I started. The title, the pay bump, the authority, so why did it feel like I'd interrupted something? I shook hands, accepted a few half-hearted pats on the back, and sat down again. The meeting moved on almost immediately, as if nothing had happened. That was the first thing that bothered me. No jokes. No side comments. No whispered congratulations, just business. Afterward, people filed out quickly. No one lingered. No one pulled me aside to celebrate. A couple of well-done comments floated my way, but they felt thin. Like obligations, not genuine reactions. And then I noticed something else. One desk was empty, not messy empty. Like someone stepped out for coffee. Clean empty. Monitor off. Personal items gone. Chair pushed in neatly. I knew whose desk it was. He wasn't just out, he was gone, and nobody mentioned him. I didn't ask about him right away. That might sound strange, considering how obvious it was. His desk had always been lived in. Stacks of folders that only he understood. A chipped mug he refused to throw out. That tiny plant he kept alive somehow, even in that dry office air. Now it was all gone. By lunchtime, I'd convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. People leave all the time. Transfers, resignations, sudden opportunities. It happens, still. The timing sat wrong. I carried my tray over to the usual table. The same group I'd been sitting with for years. They didn't wave me over this time. They just kind of made space when I approached. "Mind if I join?" I asked. A couple of them nodded. No one said no. I sat down, waiting for the usual banter to kick in. Complaints about deadlines, sarcastic takes on management, someone making fun of the coffee, nothing, just quiet chewing. "So," I said, trying to break it. "Guess things are changing." "Yeah," someone muttered. I looked around. Anyone heard from him? That did it. 3 pairs of eyes dropped to their plates. Someone cleared their throat. One of them took a sip of water that seemed to last too long. "I think he left," another said, carefully. "Left?" I repeated. "Like, resigned?" A shrug. "Something like that." Something like that. I waited for more. For someone to fill in the gaps. Add context, make it make sense, but no one did. Instead, one of them glanced at me, quick, sharp, and then looked away, not awkward, not confused, almost cautious, like I'd just asked the wrong question. And for the first time since the announcement, the promotion didn't feel like a win. It felt like I'd stepped into a space I wasn't supposed to notice. The rest of the day moved around me, but I couldn't quite step back into it. Emails kept coming. New ones, too, marked high priority, some even addressed directly to me for the first time. My title had already updated in the system. My calendar was filling up faster than I could read it. On paper, everything was exactly what I'd worked for. In practice, it felt like I'd been handed someone else's life. Around mid-afternoon, I finally went into my new office. It used to be his. The door still stuck a little when you pushed it open, like it always had. That detail hit harder than I expected. Inside, everything was stripped down. Clean desk. Empty shelves. Even the whiteboard had been wiped so thoroughly it still smelled faintly of cleaning solution. Too clean. I stepped in slowly, almost like I was entering a room that hadn't been fully vacated yet. Like I might still find something of his tucked away in a drawer, but there was nothing. No photos. No notes. No forgotten pens, just space. I sat down at the desk, testing the chair. It adjusted differently than mine had, lower, a bit stiffer. I shifted, trying to get comfortable, but it didn't quite work. I told myself it just needed time. There was a folder waiting in the center of the desk. My name was written on it in neat, printed letters. Not typed. Written. That wasn't standard. I opened it, expecting onboarding documents or transition notes. Instead, there was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. No signature, just one sentence. Ask why it was so fast. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was a joke, or a warning, because I already knew the answer I'd been given. I just wasn't sure anymore if it was the real one. I folded the paper and slid it back into the folder, closing it like I'd never opened it at all. For a few seconds, I just sat there, staring at the desk. Waiting for something to make sense. Ask why it was so fast. Fast compared to what? Promotions always feel sudden when they finally happen. I'd been waiting for this for years. If anything, I used to complain it was taking too long, so why would someone think it was fast? I leaned back in the chair, glancing around the office again. The walls were bare now, but I could still picture where his things used to be. He had a way of organizing everything, color-coded folders, notes stuck at precise angles, like even chaos had to follow rules. He wasn't careless. He wasn't impulsive, he didn't just disappear. My phone buzzed, a message from my old manager, quick check-in tomorrow morning. 1-on-1. Congrats again. Short. Efficient. No emojis, no extra warmth. That was normal for him, but today it read differently. Everything did. I picked up the folder again, hesitating before opening it a second time. The paper hadn't changed. Same handwriting. Same sentence, no explanation. If this was meant for me, it wasn't official. It didn't follow any process I recognized. It felt personal, like someone wanted me to question something I wasn't supposed to question. I slipped the paper into my bag instead of leaving it behind. That decision felt small at the time, just curiosity, but as I walked out of the office later that evening, I noticed something I hadn't before. People weren't avoiding me, they were watching me, not openly. Not enough to call it out, but just enough that I felt it, like they were waiting to see what I would do next, and whether I already knew. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of excitement. That part had already worn off somewhere between the meeting and the empty desk. What kept me awake was that sentence, looping quietly in the back of my mind, ask why it was so fast. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. A leftover note, maybe not even meant for me. People write strange things when they're leaving, half-finished thoughts, reminders that don't make sense to anyone else. Still, I kept the paper in my bag, just in case. The 1-on-1 was scheduled early. Earlier than usual. I got there a few minutes before, sitting across from my manager in his office. He smiled, the same controlled, professional smile he always used. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Good," I said automatically. "A lot to take in." "That's expected." There was a pause. Not awkward, but measured. I decided to push a little. It all happened pretty quickly. His eyes shifted, just slightly. "We had to move fast." "Because?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He leaned back in his chair. "Because the position needed to be filled." That wasn't an answer. I nodded anyway, like it was. "What happened with him?" I added, carefully. "I didn't get a chance to say goodbye." Another pause. "He chose to leave," my manager said. It was his decision. The words were clean. Final. Almost rehearsed. "Everything okay?" he asked. Watching me now, "Yeah," I said. Just surprised, I guess. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Opportunities don't wait," he said. "You stepped up." That should have felt like praise. Instead, it felt like a reminder, not of what I'd earned, but of what had been cleared out of the way. The rest of the week felt strange. I walked through the office like I was moving through someone else's home, because, in a way, I was. My title, my desk, my emails. Mine now. Everything tangible. But the energy of the room was off. Subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that I couldn't put into words. Conversations that paused when I approached. Laughter that faded just a little too early. Smiles that felt borrowed. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe everyone was just adjusting. But then I noticed little things. A sticky note left on my keyboard, scribbled in someone else's handwriting, "Watch your back." Not a joke. Not a signature. Just a warning. I shoved it into my drawer, pretending I didn't see it. But the thought lingered all day. Who wrote it? Was it meant to scare me, or just inform me? By Thursday, the whispers started. Not directly to me, not exactly. Snippets of conversation stopping mid-sentence. Quick glances across cubicles. Phones put away the moment I walked by. It was subtle enough that if I mentioned it, no one would admit anything. But I could feel it. Everyone had changed. And I had no idea why. I decided to confront it, or at least confront someone I trusted. One of the colleagues I had always considered a friend, someone who had been around longer than I had. We met at the coffee station, away from most of the office. I leaned on the counter, trying to sound casual. "Hey. Everything okay? People seem different this week." They laughed, lightly. Too lightly. Different how? I hesitated. I don't know. Tense. Awkward. Like I walked into something I shouldn't have. Their eyes flicked around, just for a second, and then back at me. "You probably did," they said softly. I laughed, but it felt hollow. And in that instant, I realized. Maybe I had. That evening, I sat at my desk long after everyone else had left. The hum of the fluorescent lights made the office feel empty, but in a different way than it usually did. Usually, late hours were peaceful. Now, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. I pulled out the folder again, the one with the single sentence. "Ask why it was so fast." I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what it meant. Maybe it wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a clue. I thought about him, the person whose desk I now sat behind. His abrupt disappearance. The way people avoided talking about it. And the way my so-called friends reacted when I asked. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something strange. Everyone's coldness didn't start with my promotion. It started with his exit. And my promotion just happened to coincide with it. I closed my eyes. Maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about him, and then a small, almost ridiculous thought crept in. What if it was my fault? Not directly, obviously, but indirectly. Maybe I was seen as the reason the position was emptied. Maybe the timing made me look like I'd benefited from something someone else lost. The idea made me feel sick. I wanted to call someone, anyone, to tell them I had nothing to do with it. But when I picked up my phone, I hesitated. Who would believe me? Who would even listen? I put the phone down. Instead, I stared at the empty chair across from me. I remembered him sitting there, laughing at some dumb office joke, tapping a pencil against his desk in rhythm with a song only he knew, and I realized the office had already moved on. The empty space wasn't just a desk anymore, it was a reminder that success sometimes comes with invisible costs, and that maybe I hadn't fully paid attention to them yet. The next morning, I tried a different approach. I made an effort to talk to people, to bridge the invisible distance. Small talk at the coffee machine. Casual comments by the printer. Even a joke about a spreadsheet error that only I would find funny. It didn't work. Faces smiled, voices responded, but the warmth was gone. It was polite. Mechanical. Hollow. And every interaction left me with a faint knot in my stomach. By midday, I started noticing patterns I hadn't seen before. Subtle things, emails copied to extra recipients, meetings scheduled without me, documents lost and resent in ways that suggested something. I couldn't quite name it. But the more I observed, the more it felt deliberate. As if the office itself had drawn a line I wasn't allowed to cross, I began to wonder if my promotion had been celebrated elsewhere, maybe in private meetings, away from me. The thought made me tense. I'd achieved this role, but somehow it felt like I'd stumbled into a spotlight I wasn't meant to enjoy. That evening, I stayed late again. The office was quiet, but I wasn't alone. The janitor paused by my desk, giving me a small, almost imperceptible nod. A gesture meant to say, "I see what's happening." I didn't understand it fully, but it unsettled me. I was being watched, yes, but also tested, in a way. And I began to think that maybe the note wasn't a warning about him. Maybe it was about me. I replayed the sentence in my mind for the 100th time, ask why it was so fast. Maybe it wasn't about timing at all. Maybe it was about curiosity. About whether I would dig. About whether I'd confront the truth behind the empty desk and the cold smiles. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but deep down, I already knew I had to, because pretending everything was fine wasn't an option anymore, and the office wasn't letting me. A few days later, I noticed something that changed everything, or at least, what I thought I understood. One of my colleagues, someone I considered neutral, someone I thought had nothing to do with the shift in atmosphere, left their cubicle door slightly ajar. I caught a glimpse of a folder on their desk, marked with my predecessor's name. Curiosity overrode caution. I edged closer, pretending to stretch, and peeked. Inside, there were notes, emails, and a timeline, meticulously organized. And there it was, a chain of internal communications that suggested the promotion hadn't been a random vacancy. Someone had orchestrated it. It felt like a relief at first. Finally, an explanation. Someone had planned the transition. That meant it wasn't personal. It wasn't my fault. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, but the relief was short-lived. As I flipped through the pages, carefully, trying not to be noticed, I noticed a detail that froze me. My predecessor hadn't resigned voluntarily. Not entirely. There were suggestions, subtle pressures, nudges disguised as opportunities elsewhere, all designed to make him leave quietly. And one name kept appearing in the thread, mine, not directly, of course. But my promotion was repeatedly referenced as the solution to an urgent leadership gap. I closed the folder quickly, heart hammering. Suddenly, everything felt different. That polite coldness. The hollow smiles. The whispers. They weren't random. They were consequences. Of him leaving. Of me stepping in. I wanted to believe it wasn't my doing. That it was corporate maneuvering, impersonal decisions. But even as I told myself that, I realized the truth might be murkier, and the thought that my success had cost someone else their place hit harder than any pride I'd felt during the announcement. I knew I had to confront it. I just didn't know how, or if I could, because sometimes the truth isn't comforting. It's a weight you weren't ready to carry. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I told myself I'd wait, gather more information, maybe even speak to my predecessor directly. But the office had already shifted into a rhythm I didn't fit. People kept their distance. Meetings I used to be invited to went without me. Emails were terse, responses clipped. Even casual greetings felt rehearsed. Around mid-morning, I saw her, someone I trusted more than anyone else in the department. She was standing near the printer, pretending to check a document, but I could see her eyes flick toward me, just long enough for a pang of worry to hit. I walked over. "Hey. Can we talk?" She hesitated. Then nodded. "Sure," she said quietly. We moved to a corner. Away from prying eyes. I found some notes. I started cautiously. About the transition. About him leaving. Her eyes widened slightly, but not in shock. More like fear. "You shouldn't have," she whispered. "What do you mean?" I asked. She glanced around. "You don't understand. No one does. It's not simple." I pressed. "I just want to know the truth. Was it pushed? Did someone orchestrate it?" She swallowed hard. "It was supposed to be clean. Nobody wanted you to know." He was meant to leave quietly, without you realizing. They didn't want to burden you with it. For a moment, I felt a twisted relief. At least it wasn't me intentionally. That thought should have been comforting, but then she added quietly, almost too low for me to hear, some of us aren't sure it's over. Not really. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Not over. What did that mean? And as I stood there, trying to digest what she said, I realized the office wasn't just cold because of the past, it was waiting. Waiting to see what I would do next. And whether I'd make the same choices that had led us here. By Friday, I was walking on eggshells. Every glance, every half-smile, every carefully worded email felt like a test. I began analyzing my own actions, wondering if anything I did could trigger another shift, another ripple that might hurt someone I hadn't even met yet. I kept thinking about the note in the folder, ask why it was so fast. At first, I thought it was a warning about the speed of my promotion. Now, I realized it might have been about the speed with which everything else had been swept under the rug, the way decisions had been made, the way people had been moved, and the way I had been elevated. Lunch came and went without incident, but I noticed one thing, a small group of people huddled near the conference room. Speaking in hushed tones, glancing at me occasionally. Something about their posture made it clear they weren't talking about routine work. Curiosity overtook caution. I edged closer, pretending to grab a coffee, and that's when I saw it. The whiteboard in the corner of the room had scribbles I hadn't noticed before, names, dates, arrows connecting boxes, annotations in red. My predecessor's name sat at the center, and mine was linked to it with a small note, replacement. I stared for longer than I should have, trying to decode it, trying to understand whether it was a plan, a warning, or a record of someone's guilt. Then one of them caught my eye. A fleeting glance, but enough to send a message, stop. I stepped back quickly, pretending I was just passing by, and suddenly, I realized the promotion wasn't the only thing that had come fast. Everything around it, alliances, departures, whispers, hidden instructions, had moved faster than I could process. I felt the first real pang of fear, because I was no longer just a participant, I was at the center, and no one was going to tell me how deep it went. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I kept replaying the week, the empty desk, the note, the whispers, the diagrams on the whiteboard. Each detail felt more sinister in isolation. I kept asking myself, did I deserve this? Was my success really mine, or just a consequence of someone else's misfortune? By Monday, I decided I had to confront it head-on. Not the office, not management, but the truth itself. I needed to know what had really happened to him. I tracked down my predecessor. It took a few phone calls, a few careful questions to people who weren't sure they should answer, but eventually, I found him at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. He looked smaller than I remembered. The energy, the confidence, the spark that had defined him at work, gone. We sat across from each other, and I barely recognized the person in front of me. I didn't see it coming, I said carefully, trying to ease into it. He shook his head. Neither did I, he murmured. His voice was flat, distant. I took a deep breath. I need to know. Was it pushed? Did someone orchestrate your exit? He paused, staring at the cup in front of him. I made a choice, he said finally. Or at least, I convinced myself I did. But the truth? The truth is, it wasn't entirely voluntary. My stomach tightened. So. You were forced out. He looked up, eyes tired. I was made to feel like I had no other option. And by the time I realized it, it was too late. I didn't want to ruin your chance. That's all I knew. I swallowed. I wanted to feel relief that it wasn't my fault. But instead, I felt hollow. I had my promotion. I had the title. The corner office. The pay raise, but the cost, someone else's stability, someone else's dignity, was staring me in the face, unignorable, and I realized that pride didn't taste like victory anymore, it tasted like silence, and guilt. I returned to the office on Tuesday, but I wasn't the same. The title on my door didn't feel like an accomplishment anymore. It felt like a warning. Every step toward my desk echoed differently. Every glance from a colleague felt sharper, loaded with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. I had entered a world where success came with invisible consequences. I tried to act normal, even cheerful. I made a point of greeting people, checking in on projects, and pretending the past week hadn't shaken me. But it was impossible. Every interaction carried weight now. Every smile felt measured. And every conversation felt like it could unravel at the wrong word. I caught a few moments of whispered conversations that stopped the instant I approached. Emails that once felt routine were suddenly loaded with implications, attachments I didn't understand. The office, which had always felt like a second home, now felt like a carefully staged theater, and I was both actor and audience. By mid-morning, I realized something worse than the whispers or the stares. No one approached me with guidance anymore. Advice, mentorship, camaraderie, all of it had evaporated. I was expected to navigate not just the work, but the unspoken politics alone, and then the thought hit me hard, maybe this was the real price of my promotion. Not the extra responsibilities, not the meetings or the paycheck, the real cost was isolation. I wasn't just succeeding. I was succeeding in someone else's absence. And everyone knew it. The office was silent when I stepped into my predecessor's old cubicle, now my office. I looked around at the empty shelves, the clean desk, the lack of personal touches, and I realized the hollow truth. I had inherited not just a role, but the consequences of someone else's displacement. Success had a shape now, and it wasn't mine, it was empty. By Wednesday, the tension was almost tangible. I kept catching colleagues glancing at me, subtly shifting conversations whenever I entered the room. I began analyzing every interaction, the length of a reply, the tone of an email, even the way someone pushed back a chair. It was exhausting. The office had become a puzzle I didn't want to solve, but couldn't ignore. Lunch was the worst. I tried sitting with my usual group, the people who had always joked and complained with me. But this time, they looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as if I were radioactive. One of them whispered something quickly, glanced at me, and then walked away. I felt my stomach knot. Was it about me? About the promotion? Or was it something deeper, something I couldn't see yet? By mid-afternoon, I noticed my predecessor's old office again. I had been avoiding it, trying not to confront the emptiness, but now I walked over intentionally. Sitting in the chair, I felt a strange connection, like a ghost of what had been there. The desk gleamed too cleanly, as though the space had been wiped of all traces of him. I opened the folder one more time. The sentence stared back at me, ask why it was so fast. Suddenly, I realized I had been reading it wrong all along. It wasn't just a warning. It was an accusation. A mirror. A test of curiosity and morality, because the truth was that my promotion had come at someone else's expense. And in the quiet, polished office, I finally understood the weight of it. It wasn't just about power or recognition. It was about the choices that got me there, and the unseen consequences of stepping into a role that wasn't mine alone to take, and for the first time, I wondered, was it even worth it? By Thursday, the social frost had become almost unbearable. I tried everything to bridge it, smiles, casual jokes, even offering to help with tasks I didn't need to touch. But nothing worked. People were polite, yes, but each interaction was like walking on a frozen lake. One wrong move, and it would crack beneath me. I started noticing little things I hadn't before. A meeting I wasn't invited to. Notes sent in passing, not addressed to me directly. A colleague pausing mid-sentence, thinking twice before saying something in my presence. It dawned on me that this wasn't about resentment. This was about control. About a silent hierarchy I had stepped into without realizing it. My promotion hadn't just advanced me, it had shifted the balance of the office. And everyone was adjusting around me, carefully, silently. I felt hollow pride that day. The kind of pride that tastes bitter, because you know someone else has paid a price. Later, I caught a glimpse of my predecessor in the hallway, just for a moment, before he disappeared behind a stairwell door. He looked back at me, eyes calm, almost sad. There was no accusation, no blame. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something had happened that couldn't be undone. I wondered if he understood the turmoil I was feeling. If he knew that walking into this promotion would feel more like stepping into a storm than reaching the finish line. by the end of the day, I realized that hollow pride. I needed answers, and for the first time, I began to consider confronting the higher-ups directly, asking the questions everyone else was too careful to voice, because if I didn't, I'd be complicit in a system that rewarded advancement while quietly punishing others, and maybe, just maybe, that silence would follow me for the rest of my career. Friday came, and with it, the final piece of the puzzle, or at least what I thought was the final piece. I scheduled a meeting with my manager, the one who had handed me the promotion, with a polite smile. My hands shook slightly as I knocked on the door, something I hadn't expected from myself. He looked up, calm, professional, completely unreadable. "Sit," he said. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. "I need to know the full story," I said. "About the promotion. And about him leaving. I need the truth." His expression didn't change. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "The truth?" he asked. "You've handled this role well. Isn't that enough?" I shook my head. "No. I can't enjoy this if I don't understand how it came to be. Was it really my chance, or was it orchestrated? Did someone have to be pushed out for me to get here?" He sighed, finally letting a small exhale escape. "It's complicated," he said. "Opportunities. They don't always come cleanly. You were ready. Someone else was struggling. The timing wasn't perfect. But that's how it is sometimes." I stared at him, trying to parse the words. "So, it was my fault?" "No," he said quickly. "Not your fault. But you can't pretend it didn't happen either. That's the burden of leadership." And just like that, the final truth settled on me. I hadn't broken any rules. I hadn't done anything overtly wrong. But the promotion, the title, the corner office, they had all come at someone else's cost. I left the meeting with a hollow sense of achievement. Pride, yes, but mixed with unease. I had the role I'd dreamed of, but the cost lingered in the empty spaces around me, in whispers, glances, and the faint memory of someone's absence. I realized then that success wasn't always a celebration. Sometimes, it's a quiet reckoning, and the question remained, could I carry it, and still feel like a good person? Because in the end, no one would tell me, the office would remain silent, and I would have to decide for myself.